Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, self-publisher. Oh, and I have a cat on my drawing table that I just had to move. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I share my creative process and the works I make online. If you'd like to support this channel, the creation of my artwork and comics, and to get additional bonus videos and bonus blog posts, more behind the scenes work, you can support this channel and subscribe at patreon.com/Jeremy. If you would like to preview some of my comics, read them for free online, you can go to comics.jeremy.net. And if you would like to buy some of my books, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. All right, so let's get started. Now, I know that last week I started getting into thumbnailing on the final issue of my current series, Morning Star. However, I had an interesting experience in figure drawing class this past week. So I take figure drawing classes every week at the Animation Guild in Burbank. And as I was in class, I think we've all had those good days and bad days, whether it's in a figure drawing class, whether it's working on our personal work, what have you. We've all got those days where things just don't go quite as planned. And I literally, like a few days later, I was talking to one of my coworkers who's also a fellow artist. And I said, do you ever have those days where you just forget how to draw? He was like, all the time, man. And for me, what I thought was really interesting is when I've been doing this long enough, drawing, painting, working on personal artwork long enough that, by the way, I see Ion Rocks is already in the chat. Glad you're here. Good to see you. If you guys have any comments or questions as we go, feel free to drop in. Sometimes I get on a roll and I talk for a little bit. So if I miss your comments, I will try to scroll back up and check everybody's, or feel free to repost it. Figure drawing. I've been doing this long enough that I know I go through periods where the artwork is not working. I'm not able to... The drawings, either I'm just like off my game, or there's something that's just not working. It's a bad drawing day. And I've been doing this long enough that I know that they happen, and I feel like I'm getting better at diagnosing and fixing them. So this video is actually, when I posted, I'm going to retitle it something similar to, holy crap, I forgot how to draw. Because that's what happened to me. And the day after class, I was sitting there just thinking about it, and I was trying to figure out, well, what am I doing wrong? And I always go back to the fundamentals, the fundamental basics of drawing, before you even get into anatomy and volume. And at the gesture level, if a drawing's not working, then nothing you put on top of that is going to work. And I started realizing that I needed to sit down and say, all right, let me try and look at just the very, very bare basics. And I have these index cards that I have kind of sitting around, and sometimes I'll do doodles and just make notes on them. And I started saying, all right, what is the simplest form of the human being? And I guess it started with me just drawing a diagram. You know what? Here, let's break open the drawing pad, and I'll just redraw it for you. Why tell when I can show? I think for those of you that are interested in comics, the whole show don't tell should resonate with you. Always remember that. Why tell what you can show? Showing is so much more powerful. Let me adjust the camera. All right. So. Fresh sheet of newsprint. So, looking at the figure, if you're trying to say what is the absolute bare basics of figure drawing, oh wow, Trevor Nielsen's in the chat. Trevor, hey, good to hear from you, man. Nice to see you here. Fellow artist friend of mine, haven't talked to in a while. Glad to see him out there. Thanks for popping in. We'll be talking about figure drawing a little bit, or really, it's more of gesture drawing. But that said, what are the absolute basics of a figure? You got your torso, and this, you know, I'm not necessarily saying upper body and lower body. Like, this is just the whole thing. So you got your torso, you've got legs, you've got arms, and you've got a head. Very simple. True, I haven't connected it with the shoulder. I haven't really drawn the pelvis in. But in terms of just saying, what do I need to really describe a figure? These are the bare basics. I mean, really, I can go ahead and connect this. So, you know, given in any pose, let's say you've got a figure that's going to be reaching up, still, rectangle, arm reaching up, another arm reaching down, feet, and a head. So really, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, I've described a figure performing an action. And I realized that I was starting to try and move ahead too early in some of my figure drawings. Now, I kind of come from the school of drawing, like roughing in the gesture of the whole figure and then slowly working in the details. They say that it isn't really good to start with one part of the body, like an arm or a hand, and slowly work out from there, or a head and work top down, because we all have certain perceptual or proportional mental distortions. We all sort of exaggerate the figure in different ways mentally, and then we have to come back in and fix and correct those. And when you're starting with the whole figure, you can correct the proportions at the start and then keep everything within those proportions. But if you start with just a head and then, you know, a body and then feet, you may make the body way too long and then legs tiny and long arms, maybe a head that's too big. Like, if you start at one piece and just slowly work your way down. Now, mind you, that's the whole point of when you're drawing it this simple, you can fix all those things right here. But when you're actually doing a detailed head and you draw a head all the way to completion with, you know, eyes, nose. This is a crappy eyes and nose. That's what happens when I'm trying to describe this stuff too quickly. But if you go ahead and you draw in even this isn't very detailed, but if you were to go and draw a detailed head, if I were to put hair on this, draw eyelids and draw all those beautiful things, and then do a neck, and then come down and draw, you know, you can see what I'm saying here is that if you start at the top and then slowly go down and work all the way down through the figure, you might, whatever proportional mistakes you've made, you've kind of locked yourself into them already because you've gone in too deep. So I realized that that's what felt wrong when I was in figure drawing class and I was having a bad night. Hey, I see more folks in the chat. I see Christian showed up. Good to see you, Christian. My nephew Clay's here. Hey, Clay. How you doing? You know, I was going to say, what I'm doing today, this exercise, I'm still talking a little bit about it before I get into the actual more of the drawing. But if you guys have an art book that you're a fan of, whether it's an educational book like Andrew Loomis or How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, if you've got an art book of like one of your favorite artists, you know, Michelangelo or Rembrandt or whoever, go ahead and grab that book, because I'm going to sit down here and I'm just going to be basically doodling. And if you guys want to sit and doodle with me, not studying for my drawings, but if you want to sit an art book of your own to the side and draw while I'm talking, I think that you might find it interesting, because what I'm going to be doing is simple enough that you can be doing your own studies while we're sitting here talking and drawing. We can all kind of draw together if you want. Because really what it's going to be is just a bunch of very simple gesture drawings about the level of this figure here, like just, you know, 9 lines, including the head, and just working through a bunch of different artwork and me trying to capture simple poses in those 9 lines. And the reason for that is because, like I said, I had a hard night in figure drawing class, and I didn't figure it out during class, but after class I figured out I wasn't paying attention to those simple fundamentals. I wasn't locking in my gesture properly. And I think the better you get at expressing the whole figure in such a simple way, the better you will be able to create a fully fleshed out, deeper figure. Clay says, I'm good. How are you? I'm very well. Any day I can sit down and do some drawing is a great day for me. Christian says, you hold your pencil a bit like a fine artist. Did you learn it or is that comfortable for you? I learned it. This was not comfortable. I had the traditional, writing grip that most artists use. And, I've mentioned I started taking figure drawing classes regularly probably about a decade ago. It took me 6 months to learn to hold the pencil like this. And you would say, well, why would you do that when you already have a comfortable, normal grip and you can draw decently? But I was in there to learn. And a lot of times when you're learning new things, the biggest challenge, I think, to anyone learning anything is being willing to let go of what's comfortable. Because when you do what's comfortable, I might not necessarily be the greatest artist, but I know what my results are. I know what my limits are, and I can draw in a way that I know what I'm going to be able to make. And I've at some level satisfied with that artwork because it's what I've chosen to make. When you decide to learn a new approach, a new skill, it means letting yourself try doing it in a new way. And when you try to do something in a new way, that means things are going to be ugly. You're going to do a lot of really bad drawings. Now, it's not even a matter of trying to learn a new approach to the figure. It's just the fact of just learning to hold the pencil in a new way. You're not going to have the control that you're used to. And when you lose when your control drops, your level of execution drops. And then you're going to be like, why am I trying to do this janky ass pencil grip? It doesn't feel right to me. It feels awkward. Everything I do looks horrible. I don't want to do this anymore. It's natural to fight against those things. But if you fight through them, if you're in fact, let's take fight out of the equation because it shouldn't be a battle. It should be sort of like a Tai Chi, an ebb and flow in terms of learning. And if you give yourself over to the uncomfortable, the discomfort of the new, you can enter a flow and you can learn to do things you weren't able to do before. For instance, the whole point of this grip, this side grip, is to use tone as a drawing method. When you use line, you can draw a cube. I think I may have done this in a recent video. You can draw a cube. God, it's a shitty cube. You can draw a cube, and let's say you want to make one side lighter and one side darker. You can shade it in like this, and you can shade it in a little bit lighter like that. If you really want to do cross-hatching, you can do cross-hatching. Now, if you draw a cube using tone instead of line, you can lightly block in one side and then the other. And all tone is a light, broad line. You take a line, instead of making it like that, tone is just that, very wide and much lighter. But the advantage of drawing in tone as opposed to line is that now you have a whole new extra tool, which is you have hard and soft edges. And hard and soft edges give you a better way to describe, or they give you a broader vocabulary for describing the nature of a surface. Because when you draw in hard lines, then you have everything is a plane. There aren't any soft turns or soft curves. Whereas if you draw in tone, like, yeah, I just drew this in and it's still a cube and it still has hard edges because the tone still terminates from one side to the other. But when you're drawing with tone, it has a more photographic feel because not everything has the hard edge that a same thing drawn with the same cube drawn with lines has. And when you expand that to drawing things beyond just boxes, when you're drawing the human form or organic shapes, or just even like a car, anything that has rounded shapes, you have that advantage of, instead of everything being a hard line, you can do soft curves and subtle turns, and it does better job of describing the nature of that surface, how it moves, how it turns. Tone is about describing how things turn towards and away light. So it gives you a whole extra vocabulary. And that relates directly to the question you had about the drawing grip, because when you use this grip, the advantage of it is that when you are drawing with a point, you have the surface that you're drawing against, and you have the tip of the pencil. And you make lines, you make dots, you make whatever you make, or you make it with hatching. When you use this grip, all you're doing is putting the pencil against the surface, and you're just kind of pushing it along. You're brushing it along. In fact, this is a lot more like painting. And then you can get broad tone. And if you still want a line, you just lift it up a little bit, and you can get a line. So this grip is really about the types of marks that it allows you to make. But yeah, so this was not something I do naturally. This was a learned task, and it took me a long time to get used to it. But now that I do, there's things that, even when I'm doing my comic book layouts, you'll see now that I will switch back and forth between this grip and that grip. And when I need to do detail, I will still go in with my overhand grip. And when I'm blocking things in, I'll use more of a figure drawing grip. So let's see here. Ion Rock says, I love How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. So much raw power in that book. Very true. John Buscema was a powerhouse. I need to go back and read some of his old Conan stuff. That's one of the things. So many old great comics I still haven't had a chance to read. Christian says, I'll definitely test this drawing method. I'm so used to stylized comic art. I used to work really hard. I worked really hard the last 10 years to break away from drawing anime. And Amaris says hi. Hi, Amaris. Thanks for joining us. You know, that's one of the things, like, I love anime artwork and I love manga, but the challenge is that it is so stylized that it's a great storytelling medium, but it does have a certain tendency for all of it to both look alike. Like, there are certain manga artists, like if you look at Masamune Shiro, you know, he's somebody who definitely jumps out of my mind. There's another artist, Blame, who does, what is that? Biomega. There's certain manga artists that have a more unique style that pops out, but manga in general, this is a broad statement. So if you're a huge manga fan, I'm not trashing it. I'm just making a overall statement that it has a tendency to all be kind of similar in terms of rendering and style. And it also tends to symbolize, meaning as opposed to something being more realistic, it tends to be sort of flattened and to be more of a, like when I drew a cube there, when I drew that cube, it's like an icon. It's a symbol for a cube. It's not an actual photorealistic rendered cube. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing for it to be, for it to be symbolic, but it's something where, I don't know, a certain amount of rendering and realism and light and depth can make something feel a little bit more alive. But these are all stylistic choices. They're not necessarily good or bad, but manga and anime do tend to the styles of the whole genre tend to meld together a bit. And then it really becomes about, the storytelling of the particular creator, which is still, very important, and that can overshadow the stylistic sides. Amara says, I was in high school. When I was in high school, my teacher broke me of the anime habit. And that's the thing. I first started reading manga when I was in high school. I was reading, I think that's where I discovered Akira and Masamune Shiro. I had started reading Appleseed. I was reading Adam Warren's Dirty Pair. He's a Western manga artist. His stuff still has a very much manga anime feel to it, and I love his work. I still continue to read his work. but there were a lot of, and those guys had a little bit more of a stylized edge to it. But I think high school is a time when a lot of people read manga because it's sort of like it's that next step growing out of like loving cartoons as a kid, that it's that stuff grown up. It's more adult in terms of content and in terms of style. So it seemed like a natural time, I think, for a lot of us high schools when we dig into it. Christian mentions Junji Ito, who I actually have the Dark Horse collection. I believe it's Museum of Horrors or Museum of Terrors, but there's like a 2 volume. It's like a massive collection of Junji Ito's work, and I've only read through part of the first one, so I just haven't had that much time. I do want to get back and dig into it. He's somebody who's a little bit more unique in terms of his style. So I mentioned that idea of very simple, just drawing a figure in just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines. And at this stage, it's also important to indicate, this is something I've learned from Carl Ganas in my figure drawing classes, is that you want to indicate what the hands and feet are at least doing. That way, if you're coming back and working on a drawing later, and you're fleshing it out and making it more detailed, you have a full sense of the figure. And plus the hands and feet, depending on what a hand's doing, if someone's at an elegant stretch, the difference between a hand or a foot, like here's an arm, having the hand go up versus going out and lengthening that, or maybe dipping down, a different hand or a foot position can change the story that the gesture is telling. So, an art book on my desk here. This is I don't know if you've heard of the Bargue method, but this is Charles Bargue and Jean-Léon Gérôme. And there's a thing called the Bargue plates, which are contained within these books. It's a French atelier figure drawing process. It's basically a whole drawing school in a book. It will not replace going to an actual drawing school, but what they did is they took this educational program that was taught in realist figure drawing circles and figure drawing ateliers and schools back in, I want to say, the late 1800s. It might have been the 1700s. Let's see. What's the dates in here? I can just look at the book and see what the dates of Bargue's work were. Let's see, from the Dalish Museum. Yeah, Charles Bargue's work. Charles Bargue was 1826 to 1883. So, yeah, late 1800s. And the book has 3 phases in it. First, it has studies of cast drawings. I don't know if you've ever done a cast drawing, but let me see. Do I have any of my statues here? This is a small mini bust of Julius Caesar. Now, in a lot of ateliers, they have students, before they actually sit down and get to work from the figure, like they'll have rooms full of large busts, like life-size busts of heads, hands, maybe less than life size or like quarter size or 1/8 scale, full figure busts or torso, not full figure, half figures, like a torso bust. I don't know why I keep saying bust, a cast, a plaster cast of, let's say, a half figure, a head, or a full figure. So this book contains a basic method for breaking down just simple, simple forms, feet, hands, using a plumb line, and then how to block in and then draw more detailed, going from a rough outline to more of a diagram to using tone, like, I mentioned drawing on the side, using the side of the pencil for shading, how to do that for a variety of drawings. So it has several of those cast drawings, and they get more and more detailed as the book goes. Then they have a section where it's actually for doing master studies, to actually pick a variety of artists that he selected. I think there's some Rembrandt drawings in here, Hans Holbein in here, a few drawings from Jerome himself, and Charles Barg. And the idea is to actually do master studies, and some of you would do those Barg studies, but in this you're doing a little bit more of analysis of form and volume and lighting. They don't want you to just mindlessly slavishly copy. And then there's a section in the back where it's just gestural drawings to study from. And this is what I wanted to look at. The reason why I grabbed this is because I was just going to sit here and, wow, sorry, keep hitting the camera with my head. I've got to adjust it a little bit so that we can get a good view of the page, and yet I'm not smacking into it. And let me know if I'm yelling too loud, because I'm kind of close to the camera. Pardon me, taking a sip of water. So, in fact, let me go back some. We'll start from here. I can just jump around as I go. So, let's just pull this over. I'm going to be shifting the book back and forth, and I'm wondering if I need to turn this camera off so I can, or actually I can just turn the camera that way, turn the light that way. Not camera. I meant the light, so you're not getting a bunch of glare on the book. All right, that's not bad. So I'm just going to go through here and just do a bunch of these simple studies. And this is when I said that if you felt like drawing with me, to please do so. Because I'm going to try and just, and what's interesting is even looking at this one, it's kind of subtle because the figure has an S curve to it in terms of the torso. So let's say that I just have like that. 1 foot coming across, 1 foot coming behind. Arms out. And already I'm seeing that the idea of trying to do the arms in one line doesn't work as well when you've got arms bent. It really seems like in order to describe this, I'm already going to have to shift from, instead of doing it all in just one line, to doing a line for the arm. And because there's severe foreshortening on this hand, it almost makes sense for me to just put the hand on top of the surface. Depending on how light you're drawing, because these are small diagrams, I'm just going to draw the hand on top of it. If I were doing like a larger drawing, then what I would probably do is draw the upper arm and then very lightly draw the forearm and then draw the hand on top of it. But because these diagrams are so small, it almost makes more sense to just draw that hand and then draw what little bit of the arms behind it. Now, I went and exaggerated too much on this curve in with the torso. The hip should probably be a little bit higher. And looking at this shape, the torso is tapering in more. So I can almost let this sort of, if you notice, even though the leg ends right here, there's a curve that goes all the way up to the bottom of the rib cage, that kind of natural curve. So you can kind of use that as a guideline. And again, this is all really just an exercise in doing quick doodles to work out basic gestures. And my instinct is to want to keep drawing this, but really that already is a lot more than what I really wanted to do. The point of this exercise is not for me to sit here and do a detailed rendering. I may come back in and do one of these drawings larger later on and just show you where I would go once I'm done doing the simple gesture. But what I really wanted to show you is just this is a practice that I wanted to do, which was do some simple gesture drawings and see how much I can tell with as little as possible. So again, trying to keep it down to that rectangle of the torso. Now there's a break in here, but I'm just for now doing it just as a curve. But just putting in that break, foot coming down, and normally I draw very angularly, which I have been criticized for both in my figure drawing class and by people who've seen some of my videos be like, why is everything gotta be straight lines? But I'm gonna go ahead, instead of doing this angularly, I'm gonna go ahead and put in this bent leg as a curve. So it ends up resting just a little bit. If you notice, they're not quite touching, but it's very close to where the other foot lands in terms of its base, and then just the 2 feet there. Now the arms come down, like let's say bottom of the rib cage is sort of down here, a little bit lower. He's got kind of a long rib cage. That elbow does not come down. You can even see, kind of looking across the form, let's say here's the bottom of the rib cage. Here's that break between the pelvis and the upper part of the torso. You know, the arm sort of falls in between there. And a lot of this stuff, I'm not necessarily trying to diagram exactly and get an exact replica of the drawing. This is more of, as a gesture, can I get the basics in there? Now, the far arm, you don't really see it all. His shoulder's here, but it's bent over. It comes kind of all the way. The only real indication you get of what the other arm is doing is that you can see it kind of poking through between the rib cage and his arm. And this arm almost feels like it should go out a little bit more. And then just a head sort of perched on top. Now, I'm not going in and fleshing these out with details, but I feel like this doesn't tell the complete story because, and I'm switching now to the more figure drawing grip, but you want to get that sense of the shoulders, the deltoids, not deltoids, the trapezius muscles in the upper shoulder, the sort of the triangle that they make coming off of the rib cage, and then the neck coming up out of the rib cage, coming in from underneath the trapezius. Like, that's an important part of the anatomical story. It isn't necessarily something that I need to capture in the gesture. And one of the things that I was thinking, hang on, I'm gonna look at the answered questions in the chat and then hopefully I will remember what I was going to tell you. Oh yeah, correcting drawings. I'll come back to that. Correcting drawings after gesture. So what was that I saw in the chat there? I see a few more comments. Amara says, I use cheap sketchbooks for my art study. Ha, well, you don't get cheaper than a pad of Canson newsprint. This is not a sponsorship. It's not an ad. Canson's nice and cheap. You know, they give you a decent pads for decent values. The only thing that I am not a fan of is that they just have a general mid-roughness. They don't have rough newsprint and smooth newsprint. This pretty much has a medium tooth to it. It's definitely, like, I have felt rougher newsprint, so it's not as rough as one that blatantly says rough on it, but it is by no means smooth newsprint. And the advantage of smooth newsprint is with smooth newsprint, you get smooth tones. Like, those lines that I just put in there, you can see the grain of the paper in those strokes. With smooth newsprint, I mean, usually artists that are trying to do very delicate, controlled work, they'll be working on, like, you know, larger, nicer paper, and they'll come in with a chamois or a tissue or a stumper or a blender, and they will create smooth gradients. With a smooth newsprint, it's easier to do that with just your drawing tool. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't use other things to smooth it out, but your strokes will naturally just, it spreads out smoothly across your drawing surface. And Amaris also says, do you have advice for those who want to draw from life but have no idea how or where to start? You know, it's funny. I was just thinking about that. There's a great YouTube channel. I will try to remember to put a link in the description when I'm done, but it's called Crocus Cafe. They're a YouTube channel that has timed figure drawing poses. So you turn on the video, and what it does, we'll have a pose. Maybe it'll be a 2-minute pose. Maybe it's a 30-second gesture pose. Maybe it's a 5-minute pose. But the video just has photos of figure drawing models that are recorded specifically by them. They produce these video sessions or these photo sessions with professional figure drawing models, and they provide these on YouTube. And they have bonus content that you can support on their Patreon. They deserve the plug, because the fact of the matter is that it's a great service they provide. The content they put on for free is great, and they deserve the plug for the work they're doing. If I didn't have access to local figure drawing classes, I would be watching their videos all the time. But they have poses there. You can sit down and you can study from them. Now, when you're asking in terms of where to start, it's just a matter of finding figure drawing classes and working from them. The starting in terms of, well, what do you do when you're drawing the figure? That's what these drawings are all about. Is I'm kind of trying to show you all the stuff that I start with when I'm actually in figure drawing class. That's sort of where this whole video started from. Like, I don't know if you saw the beginning, Amaris, but I had a really I had a rough time in figure drawing class last week, and I literally felt like I had forgotten how to draw. I was like, what's wrong? And I realized I wasn't doing the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are a very simple torso, arms, legs, and a head. That's it. So the goal with these videos the goal with the video that I'm actually presenting to you right now is to go through a bunch of fine art. In this case, I picked the Charles Bargue and Jean Jerome's drawing course, and just picking these and grabbing some random drawings and saying, all right, let me draw, like for this horizontal figure, let me start with, all right, what's the torso doing? Just a simple torso. It doesn't have the elegance of the rib cage and the hips. It's not describing all of the actual internal structures. It's just saying, what's the overall form doing? And then looking at that and saying, all right, what are the legs doing? I've got one leg coming down. The legs, the knees are kind of together, so I can almost treat those as one mass. Then you've got the lower leg continuing down. You've got the upper leg, the one on top continuing down. You've got the one on the bottom going back, and then the foot continues like almost directly behind the other foot. And then you've got the arms. You've got one arm. Now I started with doing these trying to do them in one line, but whenever they're bent, it almost kind of makes sense to get that angle in there and just do it in 2 lines. So then you've got one arm coming down in front. You've got the other arm kind of curled up in front and curled up below that arm, pressed into the figure, and then coming up right into his face. Now, if you notice the way that the face in this figure is, one hand is sort of sticking out. The arm that's on top, the hand is sticking out above the head. The one that's covering the face or cradling the face is a little bit below the head. So I kind of know that I want the head to sort of end in between these two things. So you just throw the head in there. And when you asked about how to start with figure drawing, if you have more questions about like actually going to a figure drawing class, it's just a matter of finding a class nearby and seeing what the instructor has to say. Or if it's a workshop, then you kind of want to start with something like this, where you start, it's really simple. Not, well, it's a simple process, but it's very difficult to do. You want to go from gesture, which is this. What's the main forces and features doing? And you know what? Let me finish saying what I was going to say about this, and then I will go into the actual process. But what I was going to say is this thing, I drew it slower than I normally would. Like if I wasn't talking to you guys, this would have been maybe 30 seconds to lay that out and make the little measurements about where the head's going to be, where the arm's going to be, where things line up, where the knees are. Now, what I mentioned about making corrections after the gesture is in any figure drawing, let's say you've gotten to this point. If you can do this in 30 seconds and you've got a pose that's like a 5-minute or 8-minute pose, now you've got the whole rest of the time to go in here and make corrections. Adjust, like let's say, I can see how long his neck is going out to the center of his head. Like that neck goes out almost as far as where the center of his palm is. So maybe I want to come in here and say, oh, I've got to have this shoulder, like separating the shoulder from the neck, giving him some space there and saying, all right, this neck is going to go all the way over here. So maybe that means I move this head up a little bit more. I notice that the chin is almost touching, even though he's got a beard, basically where the arm ends. And the fact that the arm seems like it's going, I drew it kind of like going like this. It's a tiny, just a fraction more that way, just a fraction. So what I was going to say about making corrections after the gesture drawing is you go in and you just make these simple torso, arms, and head. Then you come in and you make these corrections. You figure out where exactly you want your heads and hands lining up. And maybe you make changes that are not exactly what the model's doing, but what the model's doing maybe doesn't look right on your paper. And you're like, oh, I need to adjust this. Then you go in and you put the things in like, oh, his rib cage. You know, I hardly really described his rib cage or adjusted it at all in that simple figure, but the rib cage is the major structure of the body, so you got to address it. You got to give people a sense of where it is. Even this is a very crude, rough drawing. You kind of want to get in that center line that's running down the whole figure, because it also it'll help not just indicate the anatomy of the muscles, but it'll also make you understand that he's not laying on his side facing you, that he's laying on his side facing downward. Now, let me take a look in here and see if there's some more questions in the chat. And then I'll go into another thing that I think is a little bit worth describing in terms of the description of the steps of figure drawing. Christian, he says, I highly recommend going to parks or coffee shops and doing sketches of people you see. I like going to parks the most. Mara says, my twin says, thanks for the advice. She said she will be coming to class with me next week. That's fantastic. I'm always happy to hear when folks are going to figure drawing classes. It's one of my great joys and great meditations. It brings me a lot of peace and calm. It's like having a yoga studio you go to. It's my dojo. I go in there and I work out, and it puts me at peace. So I had mentioned what do you do when you're doing figure drawing. So let's say, for instance, let's take a look at just this upper part of the torso. So let's say I block in just the rib cage and the arm, upper arm, lower arm, and then the arm that's beneath that, and the head. So first you would start with gesture. Let me get that neck in there. Then you would go to volume, which is The arm generally can be can also be a rectangle, but generally it's more of a cylinder. The limbs are thought of as cylindrical forms. It's the easiest way. There's more complexities to them. It's more subtle than that in real life, but maybe a tapered cylinder. So narrower near the joints, broader towards the shoulder. And you can say the same about the forearm. Yeah, you can say the same about the neck as well. So after you get your gesture, you're working on your basic volumes. And you would end up going in and blocking in basic volumes for the rest of the figure, or if you were just going to do a detailed study of one area of it, you would go in and do the basic volumes for that. Little boxy form for the hand. The hand is elusive. It can take a lot of different forms and shapes. That center line, that it's the center line right down the middle of the torso, but notice how close it is to the bottom of that torso. So that center line's way down here. So once you have basic gestures roughed in, then comes anatomy. That's when you say, all right, here's a cylinder. Where are the deltoids, the shoulder muscles on that cylinder? You know, you would say that they're up, the upper half. You've got the bicep. The way he's got it in here, you can see the bicep kind of coming out of a split in the deltoid. Basically, the deltoid covers the place where the bicep attaches to bone, where it attaches to the skeleton underneath. You can see that it's still got a bulge there. Meanwhile, the latissimus dorsi comes from the underside and goes basically in underneath the arm. In fact, you can see a really faint. Let me see if I can make it visible in this book by bringing it closer to you. Very faintly, in Jerome's drawing, you can see a very light line. You can see how much of the latissimus dorsi, because it's a very large flat muscle, and it wraps around the back of the rib cage before it goes up underneath. And you can see, I don't know, very faintly, it's a faint line that he drew into there. Now, frequently, as a student, when I'm in figure drawing class, I will draw these things way too dark, something like that line describing the latissimus dorsi. I'm not drawing this dark. I'm drawing it dark so that you guys can see it, but I would probably also draw it darker when I'm working on my own so that I make a note that that's where it is. I want to, to help me out as a student. So I will frequently draw stuff that if I were trying to do a finished art piece, maybe I would make it as light as Jerome did. But for me trying to study, I want to say, all right, that's where that muscle is. So I don't necessarily want to go in here and do a finished drawing or go in and draw more details of the anatomy of the arm. And I wanted to just keep it really simple of just showing maybe even the upper arm. But this is really kind of a long continuation of Amaris's question of when you're starting figure drawing, first you do the gesture, then you do the basic volumes, then you do the actual anatomy. That's figure drawing. You can break it down into those simple steps, but just because they are simple in description does not mean they are simple in execution, meaning easier said than done. Now, we're already 49 minutes in, and I've been jamming for a little while. I'm going to switch gears slightly, and instead of doing more studies from the Barg book, I had another book I laid aside. Michelangelo's The Last Judgment, A Glorious Restoration. So the Last Judgment, which is a painting on the main wall of the Sistine Chapel. I've mentioned this book in videos before, and I've shown it. And the reason why I've shown it is because, let me go here to the opening pages. So this thing is, I don't know what the dimensions are, and I should probably find out so that I can quote it. You know what? That's another thing. I'm going to make a note, Sistine Chapel dimensions or Last Judgment dimensions, because I want to put that in the comments so you guys can get a sense of how big this is. But the Sistine Chapel is like the size of a football field. It's probably bigger than a football field, because when I took a tour there in Italy and actually went to Sistine Chapel, they told us what the dimensions are, and it was impressive. So imagine something on like the back wall of a sports arena, taking a mural taking up the entire wall of that sports arena. That's kind of what the Last Judgment is. So let me see. Last Judgment dimensions. As a matter of fact, I don't have a moderator for my channel. If one of you guys in the chat feel like looking up the Last Judgment on Wikipedia and finding out what the dimensions are, please throw it in the comments section, and I'll read it so that everyone can see, can hear how big that thing actually is. But it's called The Last Judgment by Michelangelo. Anyway, the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because when I've said in the past, one of the things I wanted to do was just do studies of all of the different figures in this giant piece, because as you can see, there's dozens and dozens of figures in a variety of poses in this one mural. And that's not even including all of the other murals that are inside the Sistine Chapel. But I thought, in terms of doing these simple gesture studies, I could just open this book, pick a page. Here's a bunch of demons torturing various people. Some of them are political enemies of Michelangelo that he was mocking in the artwork. There's also some saints in there that are in that are just, you know, just going through. There's a lot. This whole book also gets into the political allegories and history of the Last Judgment. I haven't read it yet. I know that Michelangelo had a lot of people that he did not necessarily get along with. In the art was very political back in the during the Renaissance. In terms of the artists that got commissions and got hired, were hired. You know, the artists who could make a living were the ones that were hired by the people in power, because they're the only ones that could afford to hire an artist to do oil paintings, frescoes, murals. Oftentimes the church were doing large commissions that were very profitable for these artists. But that also, you've got all these people with these different political connections, so it's almost like you're playing games of politics just to make a living. Famously, Michelangelo did not want to work on the Sistine Chapel. The Pope basically chose him because he was the best artist at the time. Well, I think that there were... Well, I mean, there's also the whole rivalry between Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. We don't have time to get into that. Point being is that the Pope picked Michelangelo as the best muralist in Florence, wanted him to do it. Michelangelo didn't want to do it. Michelangelo wanted to work on sculpture. And then the Pope proceeded to block a bunch of projects that Michelangelo was going to work on to keep him from doing other art, so he had to finish the Sistine Chapel. It's a whole thing. It is a beautiful, fascinating story. It's worth reading. There's a book called I'm going to start with this figure here. There's a book very worth reading, called The Agony and the Ecstasy, which is a novelization of Michelangelo's life. And it's amazing how many battles he's fighting as an artist that you're like, wow, I have these problems with my clients now. And you can almost, it's a little depressing in the sense you're like, what? Someone as great as Michelangelo had to put up with this crap. How do we win? How does an artist not have to put up with difficult clients, or not getting paid on time, or always hunting and scrabbling for their next commission? And you know what? I believe that we're in an era where we are changing the myth of the starving artist, but it's still a long, hard road. We got a lot of work to do. So. And there's another book that I have read called Oil and Marble, which covers a lot of the same territory historically, but it focuses specifically on the rivalry between Michelangelo and Leonardo. It's a great companion piece. I would never say like if you had to choose one, I would say Agony in the Ecstasy by Irving Stone, I believe his name is. But I would say that Oil and Marble, and I apologize, I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but she's a great writer. It's a great book. It's a wonderful companion piece to Agony and the Ecstasy. So it's called Oil and Marble. Those are both good books to check out. Um, it's one of those where I started talking and I lost a bit of the thread of what I was drawing. Again, I'm already going into more detail than I really feel like I should, but this is because there's so much overlapping forms, so many overlapping forms in this drawing in terms of the torso that I feel like I putting in more lines just so you can describe how these forms are going forward and backward in space. So this is going well beyond I mean, it's not well beyond. It's going slightly more complicated than those 9 lines that I showed you. But my goal here is to say, all right, I'm starting with a figure. What is the basics that I need to describe what they're doing? So whereas, you know what, just as an aside here, I'm going to say, all right, these simple lines for the torso. Yeah, 1, 2. Simple lines for the legs, a little dash for the feet, one arm, the other arm, a head. Now these don't feel like they really, to me, describe as much of what's happening here, but I think that's because Michelangelo has these very complex forms. There's so much overlap that in order to get the gestures are complicated here. But you can see, and this is another thing both with figure drawing, this is also something that you guys can do anytime you want to sit and study the form and study gesture and work on the basics. Let me move down to this guy here, this little demon, the lower one that's pulling. I'm not sure what he's either pulling or stabbing. It looks more like they're pulling something as opposed to stabbing, but I can't see. Oh, wait. You can see on the next page the other, what's above them, which if you look at I am guessing, I'm not 100% positive, but if you look at the fact that there's a figure up here who is hanging on, trying to hang on to the end of the staff, I am guessing that that is what is above this. I am not positive, but that's what it looks like to me, is that the staff is going up behind that figure and then continuing up into here. But never mind that. Simple figure. Sometimes drawing a ground plane for your gesture helps you, ground the figure, but also, let's say I'm starting with I'm going to start moving from the knee up to the torso, only because it'll help me say, all right, if this is where this guy's torso is, I can then have the other knee that's coming down, and this knee is actually a little bit in front of that knee in terms of this one's coming more forward in space. So if you look at where it's touching the ground, this one's touching the ground a little bit further back than this one. And so just even at a gesture level, you want to get those kind of subtleties. Like this one, this line that I made as a ground plane, this one's a little bit in front of that line. This one, put it a little bit behind that line. And then having just this stretching of this torso. And then having an arm sweeping across, the other arm sweeping back, his head, the upper part of his actual cranium, like if you forget about the jaw hanging below, the upper part of his cranium is almost like resting on top of his shoulders. So the jaw is sort of sticking down below, like where the rib cage is. So I can kind of put this head, first off, I drew the shoulder at too extreme of an angle. Like you can see the shoulder is like this, and I drew it like that. So these are the kind of things that at a gesture, that's the reason why I'm doing this, is to catch the, show you, this is what when I was in figure drawing class and things were going wrong, this is what I should have been doing in class to fix it. And the hope is doing this exercise, not only here in front of you guys, but I'm doing this really for me, that this will help remind me that when I'm in class, hell, I can go back to my own YouTube channel and say, next time I'm having a bad drawing night, I can just go watch my video for a few minutes and say, oh wait, this is what I need to do to fix my drawings when they're coming out crappy when I'm in class. I can see that the elbow is, if you look at the boundaries of the rib cage, the elbow is within those boundaries. I can use that as a landmark, or where you can use, the whole point of landmarks is you use them to help you figure out proportion. Instead of having the elbow out here past the boundaries of the rib cage, I know that it's within those boundaries, which also tells me that this arm is coming towards you in space somewhat, because I think if you, well, it'd be a weird, awkward pull or a twist, but there's a little bit of foreshortening going on with that arm coming towards you and then coming back. You can look at how the other shoulder, his shoulder is, you know, right in front of the head. So even though I'm thinking two-dimensionally in terms of measuring, you look at those two-dimensional positions of elements and then say, well, how does this relate to the overall volume in terms of how things move into space, into the picture plane, or out of the picture plane towards the viewer. Those things are just as important as how things line up vertically and horizontally, because they're going to change the proportions of these things. Things that are coming towards you, they might not feel as long or as tall as you know they would be proportionally, and these volumes explain why. And this drawing already, right here, just this simple little thumbnail, this is way more complicated than I intended these to be. I really wanted this to be, again, going back to those simple stick figures. So we're already past an hour. Let me just draw one or two more and then we'll wrap it up. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post them and I will try to address them before we call it a day. But let's see. Let me see if I can find a figure in here that's full figure and you can see a good sense of the whole figure's pose. Because there is a little detail that I wanted to share that I thought was useful. Let me see. In fact, I see a drawing that I want to sketch from, and let me find the detailed image of it. Here we go. So this woman turning backward, turning away from us with her torso coming forward. Another thing, first off, this is a beautiful, elegant pose to study from. One of the things that I will also do when or something I'm trying to remind myself of, in the sense of trying to use this simple gesture blocking in as a way of establishing the whole figure very quickly, very simply, is that when possible, I will combine, not necessarily combine, but I will try to, well actually no, combine is a fine word. I will try to combine, like if I can take these legs, normally you'll have like arms are going in different directions. Legs will frequently be going one forward and one backward. They'll both be going, one will be going directly forward, one will be going way down. But when you can draw legs, and the way that this is obviously the lower legs, one's going back, one is coming straight down. But the knees, the upper leg from the hip to the knee, they're almost, well, they're pretty much parallel. So I can do something where I'm coming off of the hip, I may treat these as one block. The same way that I did sort of I did a rectangle for the torso. I may do a rectangle for the knees, just saying here's both, well, for the upper legs, here they both are, and then coming down off that is the one leg coming straight down, the one going back. It's got a foot going forward. It's a little bit lower than that. Foot coming forward, the other leg, the foot going to the side. And this is more of a compositional blocking in tool. I'm not getting the twist in the torso that's happening here, so I might come in and really twist that. It really does need a line to separate the sense of between upper body and lower body, because even at this simple gesture stage, the fact that this twist is so dramatic, where the pelvis is coming towards us and the upper torso is turned almost to a full back view. It's a really hard turn, like a 3/4 back. So, and then having the simple thing of one arm that's very foreshortened, going off in the distance, going away, and then coming back, bending more back towards the body, but still continuing to head away in space. It's making a zigzag away from us in space. Putting the head on top of that, this shoulder coming down towards the viewer and kind of continuing parallel to the back, and then the arm, lower arm, dropping down between the legs. And this gesture, I'm looking at it now and I'm like, ugh, horribly out of proportion. That's one of the challenges when you're drawing and talking at the same time. I'm actually pretty good at drawing and listening. Frequently I'll be hanging out with friends and family and I'm just like, yeah, go ahead, let's hang out, and I can just sort of listen and engage and respond to yes or no questions. But talking extemporaneously, meaning off of the top of my head, while drawing, that's one of the things I like about this channel. I've been getting better at it, but it's still challenging. So this feels, no, there should be more twist. And this is one of those where, yeah, this actually is requiring a little bit more detail and gesture because of how dynamic it is. You need to get that movement into space. The rib cage is moving away from you as well, along with the arm. And this is one of the beauties of The Last Judgment. When you look at it, you see how much dynamic figure movement there is in terms of figures moving in and out. I thought in an hour's time I would have pages and pages of this, of sketches filled up. That arm's actually sticking out too much, just some deep foreshortening. But maybe if I were quieter and not being as chatty, I might get closer to what I thought I was going to do, which is just getting in here and doing a ton of drawings. Let's see here. All right. And I suppose the last thing that I wanted to throw out here before calling it a day is some more comments. Ian Rock says Musashi Kishimoto is a great study for comic book art. I know I joined that conversation late. Hey, all the recommendations the better. One other thing I was going to mention, let's see if I can find a larger image of this figure carrying the cross. Here we go. So one thing that I was going to mention that relates to the comment I made gesturally about combining knees if they're parallel. One of the things that I will do is, even if they're not parallel, I will, in terms of helping me figure out relationships between two things. So this is a case now where you've got one knee that is coming more towards the figure and one knee that's dropping down. So they're not parallel to each other and they're not aligned. You can't connect them in a mass. Except, imagine if there's just a blanket laying across his thighs, and so that there was a sort of cloth drapery kind of connecting those two. Sometimes, in order to create a relationship between two elements, or to make myself aware of them when I'm gesturing it in, I may lightly draw in that upper thigh to the knee, and then I will draw a line to where I believe that other knee is. So even though they are not connected and on the same plane, I will sort of create a plane there for a relationship. And then from there, I'll say, all right, well, where's the knee to the ankle? And it's almost like I'm moving from joint to joint to joint and trying to create a relationship. Like if you look at the hip, from the hip to the knee, it goes in a little bit. And then from the knee to the ankle, it's mostly straight down, but there is a subtle curve out. So you might almost say, all right, let me subtly curve in and subtly curve out. And then you get a bit of the sense of that rhythm there. And then with the arm, it's a little bit more awkward with the arms, but I'll do the same thing where I'll say, all right, let me look at where this elbow lines up, which is below the rib cage. So I drop a line down for here's this elbow, and then I'll say, all right, the other elbow is way up parallel to the top of the head. So I may actually go in here. Normally I try to save the head for last because if I get everything else in proportion and then drop the head in, it's kind of easier to frame everything and it's easier to make a head correct in proportion to the whole body than it is to draw a head first and then make all the other parts of the body proportional to it. And even this head, I drew it up here, not taking into account that the rib cage is somewhat foreshortened, and this head is actually dropping down because his head is bent forward. So let's say here's this shoulder coming up. Let's drop this head more like that. You actually get in there and erase what's above it. My point that I'm about to make is that what I just did with the knee doesn't necessarily work as well with the shoulder, but it can be useful, or with, yeah, really with the shoulder, because I will go from what's the relationship between the shoulder and the elbow, which is that it comes out a little bit, and then I'll say, well, what's the relation of this elbow to that elbow? And the relationship is that it is as high up as the head, as far out as like the edge of the pelvis. So I can kind of say, all right, the other elbow is all the way up here. And I'll maybe lightly put in a line just to help me. That's too high. Bring it down a little bit. And that helps me figure out proportionately that I can just loosely block in that arm. There's some strong foreshortening, and then have the upper arm coming across above the head. There we go. And then let's just drop that forearm down there. And that's kind of it. You know, it's all about just loosely blocking these things out. So this is what I do when I feel like I've completely forgotten how to draw. And like I said, this is as much for me as for you, because this will happen to me again. I will have days where I'll sit down to draw and nothing's coming out right. And I'll be like, what? It's like I've never drawn before. Nothing feels right. Everything looks horrible. Everything feels horrible. I can't make the figure do anything. I can't describe anything. And so this step of just sitting down and doing a simple basic figure and then going in and blocking in the proportions and what's happening with the body, this is how I'm going to solve this problem the next time I have it. And I was kind of excited to share this with you because even though this was me trying to work out my own problems, that's kind of the whole point of my YouTube channel, is just sharing with you what I'm doing in my creative process and how I work through all the problems I encounter. So maybe the next time that you are having drawings or doing drawings and you're like, nothing's working, the figures are all broken, it's crap, it's like I never drew before, maybe just sit down and say, simple torso, simple legs, simple arms, simple head. And then start with that. And if you can get your figure into an interesting pose doing just those things, that's a good starting point. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I see American Swordfish popped in. Sorry, I missed you, man. This is kind of that's me. That's not him. I'm saying I'm sorry I missed you. We're pretty much wrapping up here, but glad for popping in. He also mentions the Akira mangaka is also a great study. Yes, love me some Akira. Also, the one that did Pluto and Monster. Um, yes, I forget that author as well. I've been meaning to read both. They're both excellent books that come highly recommended. So, if you enjoy these videos, if you feel like they are interesting, if they're useful to you, if you'd like to support the creation of my comics work and my continuing art study, you can subscribe to my channel. You can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/Jeremy. You'll get some additional bonus videos, bonus blog posts, and exclusive content. If you'd like to read some of my comics for free, you can go to comics.jeremy.net. And if you would like to buy some of my comics, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. So guys, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for sharing this time with me, enjoying this. I hope that you guys did some sketching or doodling on your own. If you haven't, go grab an art reference book or hop on the Crocus Cafe and watch some of theirs. Do some sketching, do a little bit of drawing for half hour, 20 minutes today. If you can, whatever time you have. That's it for now.